Let's cut straight to the chase. The 1960s didn't just give us the muscle car. They gave us the mythic engines that powered an entire era of speed, rebellion, and raw American horsepower. You think modern performance is wild? Wait till you hear the stories behind these legends. Which thundering V8 or wild block beast truly reigns supreme? And how did these engines rewrite the rule book on the street and the strip? Buckle up, because these aren't just numbers. These are the hearts of icons. Chevrolet 400L88, 1967 to 1969. Paper, the Chevrolet 427L88 was a technical marvel, but behind the factory specs was a smirking lie. Chevrolet insisted this aluminum-headed big block made just 430 horsepower, trying to dissuade casual buyers and attract only the hardcore. The truth? An L88 in full song put out well over 500 horsepower, a figure most rival muscle cars could only dream about. Why hide it? Chevy didn't want the liability of selling race-bred monsters to average drivers, or risk street wrecks and warranty nightmares. The L88 featured forged internals, a sky-high compression ratio, and a solid lifter cam that made it borderline unmanageable in traffic. On race fuel, it came alive, rocketing Corvettes and Camaros down the quarter mile in a haze of burnt rubber and disbelief. Yet, the L88 wasn't just about raw numbers. Its mystique grew with every street legend, every magazine shootout, and every garage rumor. Rarity only fueled the fire. These cars were barely street legal, and only a few hundred were made. If you find one today, it's the unicorn of the classic car world, demanding 6 or even 7 figures at auction. The 427 L88 is the ultimate muscle car engine for many because it represents a time when American performance was as wild, unpredictable, and untamed as the drivers brave enough to push the throttle to the floor. Chrysler 426 Hemi the Elephant, 1966-1971. If muscle cars had a Mount Rushmore, the 426 Hemi would be front and center. Nicknamed the Elephant for its sheer size and imposing head, the Hemi was engineered to do one thing: win races. Its hemispherical combustion chambers allowed for massive airflow, while cross-bolted mains, forged internals, and huge valves made it nearly indestructible at racing RPMs. Chrysler first unleashed this beast in NASCAR, where it embarrassed the competition so badly that the rules were rewritten just to slow it down. For the street, the Hemi was rated at 425 horsepower, a deliberate underestimate to calm insurers and regulators. But in reality, these engines put out much more, especially once owners bolted on headers and bigger carbs. The 426 Hemi's impact went beyond the spec sheet. Cars like the Plymouth Roadrunner, Dodge Charger, and Barracuda became instant street legends. The Hemi's shriek at full throttle was unmistakable, a war cry that sent rivals running. To this day, 426 Hemi isn't just a number, it's a badge of honor, a phrase that means absolute dominance on the quarter mile. Even 5 decades later, its reputation is untouchable, making it the gold standard of muscle car engines, the one every collector still dreams about. Ford 427 FE Side Oiler, 1963-1968. In the world of big blocks, Ford's 427 FE Side Oiler was a breed apart. Conceived for high-speed endurance on the grueling NASCAR circuit, this engine introduced a side-mounted oil gallery that kept the crankshaft lubricated under extreme racing conditions, a fix for the catastrophic failures that plagued earlier FE motors. The result was a big block that could spin well past 7,000 RPM for hours on end, surviving abuse that would destroy lesser mills. Factory ratings said 425 horsepower, but drag and NASCAR versions cranked out far more. The 427 FE Side Oiler powered not just full-size Galaxies, but the legendary GT40s that conquered Le Mans, the Thunderbolts that dominated drag strips, and countless Cobra replicas. The mystique wasn't just about output, it was about attitude. This was an engine for serious competitors, demanding, finicky, and intolerant of neglect. It liked its timing right, its fuel fresh, and its driver fearless. When everything clicked, the 427 FE delivered a sensation like nothing else. Raw, howling power and a feeling of indestructibility. Ford's side-oiler didn't just win races. It embodied the blue-collar, blue-oval spirit of the 1960s, reminding everyone that Ford could build an engine every bit as wild and as worthy as anything from Mopar or GM. Pontiac 389 Tri-Power 1959-1966. If you want to pinpoint the moment the muscle car era began, look no further than the Pontiac 389 Tri-Power. This engine put the go in the original GTO, fusing brute force with a sense of swagger that set the template for the entire genre. With 3 two-barrel carburetors sitting in formation atop its intake, the 389 Tri-Power was a study in controlled chaos. At idle, it rumbled politely, but stomped the throttle, and all 6 barrels opened, flooding the chambers and sending the GTO surging forward with a roar that echoed through every suburban neighborhood in America. Factory ratings hovered around 348 horsepower, but the Tri-Power's true strength was in its instant torque and glorious mid-range rush. The engine's reputation quickly grew on the street, earning the GTO Tiger status among young drivers. Pontiac's genius was making all that power accessible. You could cruise to the drive-in in comfort, but line up at a stoplight and leave just about anyone staring at your taillights. The 389 Tri-Power was more than a powerhouse. It was the soul of the muscle car movement, a reminder that attitude and engineering could be fused into one. Chevrolet 396 L78, 1965 to 1970. Chevy launched the 396 L78. The game changed overnight. This was the first true big block offered in the mainstream SS Chevelle, and it instantly elevated the stakes for everyone else. The L78 came factory rated at 375 horsepower, but insiders and drag racers knew that with headers and tuning, it easily exceeded that. This engine was a technical showcase. Forged crank and rods, high-lift solid cam, deep-breathing heads, and a Holley 780 carb. Its deep lunged roar at full throttle was as much a part of the American soundscape as the Beach Boys or the Stones. What made the L78 special wasn't just peak horsepower, it was the way it delivered power everywhere, from off-idle grunt to a screaming top end. You could drive it every day, then take it to the strip and run with the fastest Mopars and Fords, no problem. The L78 powered more than Chevelle. Novas and Camaros got a taste, but it was the SS 396 Chevelle that became a street legend. For many, the L78 is the archetype of the muscle car big block, a perfect blend of muscle, manners, and menace that changed how Americans thought about speed. Buick 455 Stage 1, 1969-1970. Buick is a name you might associate with plush interiors and smooth rides, but the 455 Stage 1 shattered all stereotypes. Beneath the formal styling of the GS sat one of the most formidable torque factories ever bolted together in Detroit. The Stage 1 package took Buick's already potent 455 V8 and added bigger valves, a hotter cam, revised heads, and a massive Rochester carb. The result? A 360 horsepower rating that grossly undersold what the engine could really do. What really set the 455 Stage 1 apart was its earth-moving torque. 510 lb-ft, delivered almost off-idle. That meant the GS could launch like a slingshot, leaving faster-looking rivals shocked at the next red light. Despite its size, Stage 1 had a reputation for refinement, running smoother and quieter than most big blocks, but unleashing a tidal wave of power on command. Buick didn't scream about their performance. Real enthusiasts knew where to look. Today, the 455 Stage 1 remains a darling among collectors and drag racers. The ultimate gentleman's hot rod, proof that true muscle sometimes wears a three-piece suit. Oldsmobile 442 W30 400 1966-1967. The Oldsmobile 442 W30 400 may not have had the flashiest badge, but in the right hands, it was a street fighter in a sport coat. The W30 was Oldsmobile's answer to the escalating muscle wars, and it pulled no punches. Engineers fitted the 400 cubic inch V8 with big valve heads, a high lift cam, heavy-duty internals, and, crucially, a cold air induction system feeding fresh oxygen directly to the carb. add lightweight red plastic fender wells, deleted sound insulation, and stripped interiors. And you had a muscle machine designed for speed, not comfort. The result? 360 horsepower that felt like much more, especially when the secondaries kicked in. But what really set the W30 apart was how well it put the power down. Thanks to clever suspension tuning, these cars hooked up off the line, making them terrors at the strip and on the street. The W30 wasn't just about brute force. It was about a carefully engineered package that made the most of every component. For Oldsmobile fans, this was the ultimate badge of honor. A rebel with a cause, built to embarrass bigger, flashier names and do it with style. Chrysler 446-pack 1969-1971. If subtlety isn't your thing, Chrysler's 446-pack was the hammer you needed. This engine was an exercise in excess. 3 Holley 2 barrels sitting atop a high-rise intake, feeding 440 cubic inches of Mopar's best big block. Factory rated at 390 horsepower, the true story was told in the Torquay Curve, a pavement-wrinkling 490 lb-ft that showed up early and stuck around all the way to Redline. The 6-pack setup wasn't just for show. It gave Roadrunners, Super Bs, and even Chargers brutal off-the-line snap and relentless top-end charge. On the street, the sight of that bulging, shaker-topped hood was enough to clear the fast lane. The 446-pack's appeal wasn't just power, it was accessibility. Cheaper and less finicky than a Hemi, it lets ordinary drivers taste near Hemi levels of acceleration without the headache of constant tuning. Today, the 6-pack remains a symbol of Mopar excess, a technical marvel, a street legend, and proof that sometimes more really is more. Ford 428 Cobra Jet 1968 to 1970. Ford's 428 Cobra Jet arrived with one mission: to win the horsepower war, both on the street and at the drag strip. This was the engine that put Ford muscle cars firmly back in the spotlight, giving Mustangs, Fairlanes, and even Torinos real bite. Officially rated at a modest 335 horsepower, another classic case of Detroit sandbagging, the Cobra Jet's true numbers were well over 400 horsepower with a few bolt-ons. Its secret sauce? High-flow heads borrowed from the 427, beefy bottom-end hardware, and a huge Holley carb feeding a bottomless appetite for fuel and air. The 428 CJ made the Mustang a true stoplight terror. Reliable, brutally torquey, and capable of embarrassing far more expensive competition. It was so good, in fact, that Ford even offered a Super Cobra Jet version with even tougher internals for drag racers. The 428 CJ didn't just restore Ford's muscle cred, it helped launch a new era of factory-supported racing and street performance that still echoes today. For Ford fans, it's not just an engine, it's a statement. Plymouth 426 Wedge Max Wedge 1962-1964. Before the Hemi became king, Plymouth's Max Wedge was the engine that made Mopar the name to beat on the quarter mile. The 426 cubic inch Ramcharger V8 was designed with one goal in mind: drag strip domination. Everything about this engine screamed race car. Forged pistons and rods, giant intake ports, high-flow heads, and radical cam profiles. In superstock trim, the Max Wedge was conservatively rated at 415 to 425 horsepower, but everyone knew those numbers were just for show. The real story was told in elapsed times. Bone stock Max Wedge Belvederes and Savoys consistently ran mid-11s, years before most Detroit iron could even dream of 13s. The Max Wedge wasn't for the faint of heart. It was notoriously finicky, requiring race gas and a skilled hand at the tuning wrench. But for those who could handle it, the Max Wedge delivered pure, unfiltered 1960 speed, screaming, shaking, and utterly addictive. For Mopar fans, it remains the blueprint for how to go fast the hard way. Chevrolet 302 DZ 1977-1979. Built for Trans Am road racing, the Chevrolet 302 DZ was a small block that punched way above its weight. Conceived by marrying the 327's crank with a 4-inch bore block, the result was a 302 cubic inch screamer that loved to rev. Factory rated at 290 horsepower. The real number was far higher, especially once racers bolted on headers and aftermarket cams. The 302 DZ was all about high RPM power, peaking well above 6,000 RPM and encouraging drivers to push past redline, Fitted only to the Camaro Z28, it transformed the car into a circuit legend, balancing agility with enough raw grunt to leave the competition gasping. The DZ302 wasn't about brute torque off the line. It was about precision, balance, and relentless acceleration through the gears. Its solid lifter cam delivered a distinctive lope at idle, but when unleashed, it howled in a way no other small block could match. For many, the DZ302 remains the ultimate road course V8, proof that sometimes the best muscle doesn't come in the biggest package. Pontiac 421 Super Duty 1961-1963. The Pontiac 421 Super Duty is the forgotten sledgehammer that lit the fuse for the entire muscle car explosion. Originally designed for drag racing and NASCAR, the Super Duty was all business. Forged internals, heavy-duty rods, massive ports, and a cam profile that screamed performance. Factory ratings hovered at 405 horsepower, but race-prepped versions routinely put out much more. In the early 1960s, this engine turned full-size Catalinas into quarter-mile monsters, cars that could run mid-12s or better with little more than slicks and an open exhaust. The 421 Super Duty's reputation quickly spread, and Pontiac made a few available to savvy insiders for street use, creating the first wave of what we now call factory hot rods. Expensive, rare, and somewhat temperamental, the Super Duty wasn't for everyone, but for those who got their hands on one, it was a ticket to instant legend status. For muscle car historians, the 421 Super Duty is the Genesis engine, the one that proved Detroit was ready to build street cars with race-bred power. Mercury 428 Super Cobra Jet, 1969-1970. Mercury always seemed to operate in the shadows of Ford, but with the 428 Super Cobra Jet, they built something that didn't need to shout to be feared. Based on the already potent 428 CJ, the Super Cobra Jet added heavier-duty internals, beefier rods, a larger harmonic balancer, and an oil cooler to handle the rigors of drag racing. Power was officially 335 to 360 horsepower, but everyone knew it was sandbagged to keep insurers happy. What made the 428 SCJ special wasn't just output, it was the entire package. Fitted to Cyclones and Cougar Eliminators, these cars looked understated, but were built to launch hard, run strong, and survive countless passes down the strip. The Super Cobra Jet made Mercury's muscle machines true sleepers. You'd never suspect just how brutal they could be until the light turned green. Today, the 428 CJ remains a holy grail for collectors and racers who appreciate understated speed with a killer instinct. AMC 390 1968-1970. AMC didn't have the budget of the big three, but with the 390 V8, they had all the attitude. Dropped into the AMX and Javelin, the 390 was a tight, high-revving package rated at 315 to 325 horsepower, enough to keep pace with cars costing far more. What set the AMC 390 apart was how it delivered power, a compact block with short intake runners and a willingness to rev, plus a beefy bottom end that could take nitrous or wild cams without complaint. Lightweight meant AMC muscle cars had an unbeatable power-to-weight ratio, often surprising more established rivals at the track. The 390 wasn't about flash, it was about results, and it made AMX drivers the terrors of local drag strips. For fans of the underdog, the 390 is the ultimate symbol. Proof that clever engineering, guts, and a little attitude could give even the smallest company a seat at the table during Detroit's wildest era. Chevrolet 409, 1961-1965. Few engines have as much cultural cachet as Chevrolet's 409. Immortalized in Beach Boys songs and hot rod folklore, the 409 started as an evolution of Chevy's W-Series big block, but quickly took on a life of its own. Available in full-size Impalas and Bel Airs, the dual quad, solid lifter 409 put out up to 425 horsepower, a staggering figure in the early 1960s. Its distinctive scalloped valve covers and deep throaty growl made it an instant icon at the drag strip. More than just numbers, the 409 defined an era when American youth first discovered the magic of horsepower. It inspired a whole generation of street racers and weekend warriors and helped turn Chevy into the dominant force in superstock racing. For collectors and old-school muscle fans, the 409 is pure nostalgia, a reminder of the days when you could buy genuine street power right off the showroom floor and become a legend on your block. So there you have it. 15 engines that didn't just move cars, but moved the culture. Every time one of these monsters roared to life, it wasn't just about speed, it was about staking a claim in American history. What's your pick for the best muscle engine of the 1960s? Did your favorite make the cut, or are you still dreaming about that perfect big block? Hit the comments, subscribe for more muscle memories, and keep your foot planted. The golden age isn't over, it just changed gears.